First of all, looking at verse 6. There was no divorce before the fall. Now, that may seem like a given, but that's extremely important. Verse 6 says, but from the beginning of the creation, you see what Jesus is doing? He's backing up before the exception ever came into place, going into pre-fall paradise. And in fact, in Matthew 19, verse 8, Jesus even more pointed. He says, in talking about divorce, but from the beginning it was not so. Matthew 19, verse 8. From the beginning it was not. What is Jesus doing? He's providing us here, and please note this down if you're taking notes, because this expands way beyond the issue of divorce. He's providing us with a powerful ethical principle. A powerful ethical principle. In the beginning of the Bible, in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, God gives us a window. A window into perfection. A window into the lives of perfect humanity. And through that window, if we could peep through that window, as we do in Genesis 1 and 2, we see humanity interacting in 3 spheres. Three parts of human life. First of all, the worship sphere. Secondly, the cultural sphere. And thirdly, the familial or the family sphere. Let me just break those down a minute and then we'll get to the point. In terms of Adam and Eve's church life, their worship sphere, if you look into Genesis 1 and 2, what you see is they walked blameless before the Lord and they enjoyed a day of rest. All right, those are creation ordinances. They walked blameless before the Lord. They enjoyed a day of rest. That's how it ought to be. Any arguments to that? No, of course not. In pre-fall paradise, man walked blameless before the Lord and observed a day of rest. God himself rested, implementing that day of rest. All right, so that's their worship sphere or their church life, so to speak. In terms of their cultural life, they discharged their duties of work with joy and vigor. And we've mentioned this before. Is work a curse? No, it's not a curse. The pain that's associated with work is part of the curse, but God gave Adam a job in paradise. So we peep through that window, and what we see is Adam working and loving it. And that's the way it ought to be, you see. Now, in terms of their family life, thirdly, they remained faithful only to each other. Now, you might say, well, of course, they were the only 2 people, but the point is we're looking in, and we're seeing something that's perfect. And what we see is a man and a woman living together exclusively, and as long as that time of perfection lasted. The point is, anything other than that is a deviation. Right? Anything other than what we see in those perfect relationships is a deviation from God's intention. So the very first point in terms of understanding God's rule of marriage is that from the beginning, His plan was one man, one woman in eternal, long-lasting fellowship as long as life lasts in this world. Secondly, Jesus teaches the rule of marriage by the one flesh principle. Right? The one flesh principle. And we see this in chapter 10, the first part of 6 and the second part of 8. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And then skipping to verse 8, and the 2, male and female, shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer 2, but one flesh. What's Jesus doing here? He's talking about 2 fleshes. 2 fleshes, male and female. God created them male and female. 2 unique fleshes, but they were complementary, you see. Humanity was created to be complementary. And at the risk of being a bit graphic, we see that they were complementary. They fit each other physiologically, emotionally, spiritually. They fit. Man and woman were like 2 puzzle pieces that, when put together, fit. And something powerful happened when they came together. Something powerful happened when those 2 pieces come together. Those 2 fleshes become one. And Jesus says, so that they're not even 2 anymore, but one flesh. That's a powerful principle. Right? Establishing the rule of marriage, the one flesh principle. Thirdly, Jesus establishes the rule of marriage by comparing that bond with the filial bond. And by filial, I simply mean the relationship between a parent and a child. This is incredible what Jesus says here. He says in that same area, verse 7, "For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife." What's Jesus saying? He's saying that the marital bond is stronger than the filial bond in the eyes of God. In the eyes of God, that's the strongest bond. He says, look, a man's going to leave his father and mother. That happens. When he comes together with his wife, that's the strongest bond. That never is to end. So just think about it. Just reflect on that for a minute. How strong is the bond between parents and children? How strong is that bond? Right? Those of you who have children that have grown up, you can just remember, as we're experiencing presently, having little children and just imagining them leaving your home. And you did have that happen in your cases, a number of you. But it's powerful. Right? We see too often images on television where a woman or a man is overwhelmed with grief because their child's been kidnapped. You can visualize that on television. This grief, overwhelmed mother just bawling on the television because her child's been kidnapped. Right? That bond has been severed. Child is gone. Jesus says that's nothing. That's nothing compared with the bond of a husband and a wife. Because a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. God says the marital bond is stronger. And that's something that we need to fix in our minds because it's what God teaches. Fourth, the rule of marriage is taught by the fact that the union is made by God. The union is made by God. God joins man and woman together into one flesh. It's not like this is just two puzzle pieces happening together and clicking and it happened to fit. God made this thing. Well, this is powerful. You know what it feels like to have something that you made be destroyed. Right? We've all made things. I'm just thinking of this time this summer when we were visiting my in-laws, and my father has this toy, this game. It's called American Plastic Bricks. It was the precursor to Lego. It was actually made by a company called Elgo, and then Lego, I think, took over from that. But he bought way too many boxes of these things because he didn't have that many when he was a kid. So we went on eBay and bought box after box of American Plastic Bricks. And there's blueprints, and you can make towns, you can make houses. And I made this really elaborate, tall building. I was real proud of it. And you should know that these bricks don't lock like Legos do. They just sort of set on top. And we have little children. And I put so much time into this, and before you know it, kid comes along and boom, it's gone. And believe it or not, I was upset. I was mad when my plastic bricks tipped over. Why? Because I made that thing. I bonded those bricks together, not very well obviously, but I'd created that thing. I'd brought those pieces together. There's something powerful about making something, about bringing things together. Something happens in marriage that goes way beyond the two people, you see. God made that bond. And so the question is, who are we to separate that? Right, that's what Jesus says here. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate.